Okay. Thank you once again, everyone. Good evening and welcome to Malaysiakini. Can hear me? Can everybody hear me in the back? Am I clear? All right. Cool. Thanks for spending the Friday night with us. I know everybody's still in the Hari Raya mood. You know, there's like open houses and makan-makan that you all can be to, but you all decided to give this night to us, and we really appreciate that. And we hope to make this worthwhile for everyone. So before we begin, I'd like to invite some of you in front, if you can. In the back. Yeah, people in the back, come and sit in front and fill in the chairs in front, because there are about 4 or 5 over here. Okay, I know Malaysians like to sit in the back and baling batu daripada belakang, but you know, it's not the. It's you Malaysia now, you know. Ya, jangan baling telur juga lah. Baling soalan tak boleh, jangan baling telur. And one other important thing that I want to add is this: that this is a recorded closed door session. So we'll be recording you for a video that we are going to publish on April 13th. Now, this video is part of Malaysiakini's continuing coverage on the Freedom of Information Act and issues concerning the Freedom of Information Act. This is also a collaboration between us and the Center for Independent Journalism. And the video itself is part of that coverage and also advocacy in the build-up to the FOI that we are expected to see tabled in June, maybe, God willing, right? And so with that, I'd like to also thank CIJ for gathering a very strong panel of experts to talk about a topic that I'm sure is very important to all of us. Yeah, especially this audience here, because you know because this is an invitation only, and we managed to ensure that who we invite are people who are most likely to use the FOI. These residents groups, civil society organizations, yeah, people from the academia, researchers, even journalists, right? So because we understand that this is one of the biggest institutional reforms that the Madani administration is embarking on this year. And it could potentially basically change, I think, you know, how we as a society function, right? Because as you all know, the aim of the FOI is basically to give everybody the power to ask the government for information. And this is information for like what kind of contracts they sign, what kind of airplanes they're purchasing, you know, even up to like, say, a highway that is going to cut through your neighborhood. You can basically ask that kind of information from the government. So, theoretically. So the thing is, the aim also of this session is that so that we, people who are likely to use the Freedom of Information Act, to come together to share observations, but also experiences. Because I know some of you have even used the Selangor and Penang versions of this act, right? They're called the enactments in Penang and Selangor. And to share what worked and what did not work, so that we as a society can collectively work together to ensure that Malaysia gets that strong and effective freedom of information law that it deserves. Yeah. So with that, that's why we are extremely grateful that we have a representative from the Legal Affairs Division of the Prime Minister's Department, Datuk Dr. S. Punitha, who is the Deputy Director General of Policy and Development. Okay. So Dr. Punitha is going to... So she'll give us an idea of what the structure of the law will look like, the broad strokes of what law will look like and how it will work. And then we also have Professor Sabariah Muhammad Salleh from Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Yeah, give a round of applause for her. Besides being an expert in media studies and communication, she also is my ex-colleague from News Straits Times back then. So she's going to talk about how important it is for the media to have this, but also I think, you know, as we were talking about how it can help fight misinformation and disinformation, right? Yeah. And lastly, of course, very important person from CIJ, Mr. Irfan Shaharuddin, yeah, who's a program officer for the Right to Information Initiative. Is that right? Yeah. Right to Information program at CIJ. And they've been and CIJ has been really active, right, in testing the laws in Penang and Selangor and to see how they work. And we'd like you to share that with us as well. And as I said, it's more a dialogue, right? Not really a one-way street, but where we can share what we know and what we would like to know in order to make this law essentially as effective and strong as we want it to be. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Punitha to begin the first round of sessions. You have about 4 minutes. Thank you.
4 minutes, right? Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you to Malaysiakini, of course, for inviting us to get the government to come here and to share whatever that we have done so far. Also, I'm really amazed. You managed to get a good crowd on a Friday night. It's not that easy. People rather do other things. But thank you for joining us. I think the FOI, what we've planned to call this law the FOI, okay, the Freedom of Information legislation, Freedom of Information Act. We started working on this law way back in 2019. So it's not something that we've just started on. So 2019, it all started when we had a group of CSOs actually met us. Particularly, they met me in my office in 2019, CIJ. I have to give credit to them. They have been very persistent. As all of you know, from 2019 till now, we had many governments and many prime ministers and many ministers. So CIJ has been very persistent in driving this cause with us. And we managed to look at all the pertinent areas. We also had some study trips overseas to look at how it's done in other countries, Australia, in UK. And finally, we came up with the parameters of the law itself. Of course, when you want to develop a law, you have to first come up with a policy. So we got the policy parameters done. And then, of course, the CSOs and the NGOs were always with us. As opposed to what many people think, the government tend to do things on their own without consultation. But in the case of the FOI, a lot of consultation was done. We had a lot of RTI experts coming in from overseas to actually give us examples of how it's practiced overseas. We had some very good commissioners, like, for example, from Sri Lanka, for example, Indonesia. So they actually came down. We worked very closely with CIJ and a lot of experiences. For me, particularly, when I thought of FOI, immediately being a government servant, oh, no way, we are not gonna divulge information. So immediately there's a no, and it is going to be a big challenge for us to bring the rest of the civil servants on board. But when you start dealing with these people, when you actually understand what problem the people are actually facing, basic information, you can't even get basic information, then you realize, hey, if I'm in that shoes, it's the same thing. If you're sitting in the government, you say, okay, no way. But then if you are the other side of the table, you know that this is the same exact problem that we'll be facing. So that's when all of us started realizing that a FOI is really, really important. And then we had a lot of workshops, a lot of meetings, and finally parameters were formed. And then we actually brought a cabinet paper, and the cabinet paper was approved by the cabinet, the Madani government. Of course, we had a few governments looking into it. Then finally, the Madani government approved the cabinet paper, and we have a pro tem committee that actually worked on drafting the law. So we decided that we cannot do this on our own. So we came up with a pro tem committee that's made of civil servants, of course, like the Ministry of Finance, Public Services Department. We had the Digital Ministry, Communication Ministry. The department is in charge of OSA. So we got all these people in together with all our CSO, NGO friends and academicians. And finally, we have the bill with us. So the bill is ready, drafted. It's now with the chambers, with the AG's chambers, going through some legal scrubbing. We hope to actually table this in July. So we really hope it'll be out there soon. I think that's pretty much for 4 minutes or more. Yes, exactly.
Thank you so much, Shaharuddin. Firstly, Selamat Hari Raya to those celebrating. And yes, thank you for being here. To be honest, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of people. Okay, so speaking about freedom of information, I'm also a fact checker for Jomcheck Malaysia. So sometimes when we need to do fact checking, we need access to information. And having this act would really help us in fighting disinformation and misinformation. I really see it as something positive. You know, it has benefits. It can benefit the rakyat, civil societies, NGOs, you know, for us to better understand how decisions are made. It builds trust. This transparency will make people more confident with what the government is doing because they can research and search on why and how the decisions are made. It can create concrete arguments. If you want to defend something, then you would have the proof, and the rakyat can see these proofs. If not, we are still, wondering, betul ke? That kind of thing, right? And then hopefully it will also hinder from corruption happening. So this is something very positive. And as a researcher, it will also benefit us because sometimes, I mean, I have to be honest here, when we do research, we need data, we need statistics, we need information, we need to have access to all this. It's not easy. Sometimes we can pay to request for these data, but sometimes you cannot access the data. So without these data, we cannot really make a good, research. Our research findings will be affected. So having this act would definitely really help us because as researchers, we also help out with like what Dr. said just now with policy making and etc. And having access to this sort of documents and data and all that would make it richer, more comprehensive, and better. And as a media, of course, having access will help the media write better reports. Sometimes you will read like, oh, we cannot reach the other party, there is no comments and etc. But by having access to these documents, when whatever they write will be backed up by evidence and proofs. So it is a tool. It's a way. It's a very good way. But as a researcher, I'm also concerned because I work a lot with misinfo and disinfo. And as I feel sometimes, according to research, people can be overwhelmed with data. They can be overwhelmed with too much information. How do they make sense of this information? How do they understand the statistical analysis and etc.? How do they, understand it? And when they relay this information, is it correct? Is it accurate? And when it's not accurately dissected or understood, it will lead to more misinformation and disinformation being spread. And this is, I think, a concern for me. And also, for instance, like if you have access to criminal cases, data, and you make a story for journalists, for instance, or any key opinion leader, an influencer would have access to all these data. And we know influencers, they do not really have that background to be non-biased, to know how to use and process this data. So that is actually my concern and probably something that we can discuss today. How do we balance that? Is there a mechanism to ensure that all these data are correctly interpreted and etc.? So that's from me, Sheridan.
Thank you. I mean, both off a good start because everybody is within time. Yeah. No, it just gives us more time to discuss this later. But I think just to summarize, it's from Dr. Punitha and also from Prof. Sabariah. You guys are saying that this essentially is it's essentially a beneficial law, right? Theoretically. But then at the same time, we also have already laws like this in Selangor and Penang, right? And which are theoretically supposed to be beneficial, but I think Irfan from CIJ can kind of enlighten us what some of the experiences have been in trying to use the Selangor and Penang enactments. So thank you very much, Irfan. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Sheridan. Assalamualaikum, a very good evening to all. Selamat Hari Raya too. Okay, so from our experience, CIG have tried applying for the FOIA in Selangor and Penang, And the difference that we face is that in Penang, it costs us much more rather than Selangor, because you see, when we are asked for information from 2021 to mid 2024, every year of information we need to pay additional 100. So from there, we already spend 400. And for application, we need to spend another 50 ringgit. And it needs to add one more kind of fee, which is a processing fee that costs us about 160. So in total, it costs us about 510 ringgit just for one information. So we ask the data for the number of requests that the government received, and also the number of rejection from all of the Majlis Pembandaran in Penang. When we compare with Selangor, it costs us much more cheaper, which is only 12 ringgit. And they even give us in a soft copy. So in terms of this, we can see that there is a stark contrast between how the state government in Penang and Selangor operate their own FOI law, you see. And I think the cost alone puts a much more burden to us, even though we are an organization which we have our own funding. But just imagine when it comes to a lay person, someone who are being affected with land reclamation, for example, maybe it costs them more, and we can see that for cases like in reclamation in the South Penang, it also cost him a lot more money, just to ask for information, which in return, if it was being rejected by the government, the money is not being refunded. So that is the kind of thing that CIJ really concerned of when it comes to the cost. And in terms of the payment, it is also not centralized. When it comes to the payment in Majlis Bandar Pulau Pinang, we have to go to the Komta, to the SUK office, just to pay by in person. But when it comes to Seberang Jaya, Majlis Mandaris Seberang Jaya, we can pay by online. So the difference between these two municipal council, it shows that there is no streamlining in terms of payment, and it costs us like a lot of manpower, just to ask someone to pay for the fees and those kinds of things. Yeah.
Well, does anybody have questions yet? I actually do. So for Dr. Punitha, I mean, like, say the most basic, I guess, would come, following on what Irfan said, is how much will it cost, or have the cost been determined in for each FOI request at the national level?
Okay, I think I did mention that we have a pro tem committee. So of course in the pro tem committee there was a lot of arguments. You have the civil society organizations, and then you also have the government agencies. So of course the civil society organizations, they were saying free, no charge. I have my officer here with me. I must introduce him, Azrael, who is actually the desk officer for FOI, and is very knowledgeable in FOI. So if I can't answer any questions, Azrael will help you answer. But I think we settled down for very small. I think about 10 ringgit. That was our agreement. Only one-time fees, but of course we were thinking about the photocopy charges and things like that. But of course, as Irfan mentioned, Penang, Selangor were all good test cases for us. Thank God that the federal law would actually take into consideration all these shortfalls that public actually go through when they deal with some of these agencies in Selangor and Penang. So far in Selangor, I don't think we've heard much issues, but I think in Penang quite a number of issues that we've heard. I wouldn't want to share them here so much. Maybe Irfan can share if you want to. Just trying to play safe lah. But cost is one thing. I think in our discussion in our pro tem committee, important elements that we focus: affordability. It has to be affordable. Okay, it has to be accessible to the public. You cannot make it difficult for them. I think that is something that we also talked about. It has to be simple. Timeliness. You know, you have to respond within a given time. So there's always that time. 3 days we have to let you know that we've received. And it's being processed. And if it is an emergency request, I think, but the law has not been passed, so I can't really reveal too much things from the law. But policy wise, we put 48 hours if it's an emergency request. These are some of the things that we've come to agreement with our CSO friends. I think those are things that we have focused, and we of course, the exemptions. I think you probably want to go into that later. But yes, affordability is definitely a very important thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just introduce myself first. My name is Hasbi. I am from Sioman Collective. We work on disability rights, and my question is for Dr. Punitha. So I've also have a very great interest in freedom of information, and basically, together with CIJ as well, we have been looking at the freedom of information laws in Australia, EU, and Bayu has done the same thing as well. My question is, to what extent will the freedom of information law in Malaysia mandate accessibility? Because in the experience of overseas laws, like the EU has a European Union accessibility law. So the Freedom of Information Act itself does not really mandate or describe what accessible documents are, what is accessibility, but it points to the Accessibility Act. Similar for Australia as well, and similar for many other jurisdictions. The concern I have as a disabled person in Malaysia is because any FOI law in Malaysia will need to point to the accessibility. Basically, the Persons with Disabilities Act. Persons with Disabilities Act does not mandate any kind of accessibility. It does not have any kind of redress mechanisms if documents are not provided in accessible format. Long story short, freedom of information is not mandated for persons with disabilities. The right to information is not mandated in any law, any legislation. Yeah. So what does Bayu plan to do with it? What does Bayu plan to do about it?
Thanks. Hi. My name is Andrew Koo, lawyer here in KL. I have two questions, one specifically for Dr. Punitha, and then one for everyone else who wants to answer. So my first specific question is, there's a little bit of, well, maybe not a little, there's a degree of skepticism when it comes to some of the legislative changes that the government is bringing into, one of which being the FOI bill, partly because when we looked at how the MCMC Act was amended, right, it was, the idea or the tag was that it was reform, but it was reform in a very negative sense, in the sense that it tightened things up, it made things more difficult, the punishments were increased, that sort of thing. So when it comes to the FOI bill, I know you've been working with CIJ and all that, and some of the lawyers were colleagues of mine, but what can you say to us that could address any concerns that the public might have about whether or not this is really meant to be opening up government, or is this just a way of telling the world, oh, we have FOI Act of some sort, right? We use the term or the terminology of we have an FOI Act, but in reality, we are not getting any more new access to information. So that's my question to you. My general question to the other members of the panel is, what have we learned from the failings of the FOI enactment in Selangor and Penang that we are now curing or hope to cure by the provisions of the FOI Act? Because while Selangor and Penang have had an FOI enactment, there are lots of complaints about how it was rolled out, how it's being used, the appeals against denials and things like that. So what are the lessons that we have learned from that we are now going to address in this new piece of legislation? Thank you.
I've been following the development of the bill in across the last several years. The town halls were held, and I'm very grateful to Irfan and the CIJ for inviting me to many of those things. What the comment that I want to make is this, that I have not seen such consultation between government and the public on the preparation of a legislation. And I've not seen the involvement of an NGO such as the CIJ, not such as, but the involvement of CIJ in the preparation of the legislation. If we could only extend that same level of consultation for all legislation, it would be very useful. Recently, they passed the Gig Workers Act, and they say that there was consultation, but I was not aware of any consultation. Certainly not to the extent that that CIJ played in the preparation of this legislation. The second point I want to make again is not so much a question, but again a response to something that was said. The question is searching for a justification for a freedom of information bill. Now, I think the law has overtaken the preparation for the legislation. The law now holds that there is a right to information, not just any right, a constitutional right to information. So actually, if you've been talking about freedom of information, which is generally an administrative structure to obtain information, to access information, that actually has been overridden by the fact that every citizen in this country has a right to information. And that has been supported in 2 cases already, which have been heard as recently as 2024. Having said that, the need to justify it, and again, as I said, in the last few months, perhaps the last year, I think there's a need for us to decouple ourselves from the Western notions of any of these laws. I don't think that the justification for such a legislation is to be found in the way in which the Americans have drafted it, the British have drafted it, or the Australians have drafted it. I think we need to find another justification. And the justification is fairly straightforward. Information with the government does not belong to the government. That's the first principle. It is not their information.
Thank you.
So just let me finish this.
I guess we want to.
I understand. So if the information in the first place is not the government information, the access or accessing information or the right to information is simply the people who are entitled to the information seeking or requesting to see the information. So that I think should be the justification.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Okay, the first question is on accessibility laws. Disable. I think the FOI legislation that we're drafting is it's a federal law. We've never really had a particular law on FOI. So that's the purpose of this law. So it is for everyone. So it doesn't leave out anyone, as our friend rightfully mentioned. It is the right. I think we are moving away from the need to know basis. We are moving away from that to the right to know something. So it is the first time that we are having a federal law. Otherwise, you have got fragmented information everywhere, and then you have, of course, over that you have the OSA that has this overarching discretionary powers to actually classify information, which makes it even more difficult. So with this law, we are talking about accessibility to the public, regardless of who the person is. So that is the first thing. Second, of course, is if I could answer my good friend Andrew's question. Andrew always has the difficult questions. Okay, I don't know how to tell you that this will be the best law and it's going to alleviate problems and all that, because we are trying it. We are trying. But what I can tell you is that this is different from the other laws because it has gone through a lot of engagement and consultation. We have gone countrywide by region, consulting not just agencies, even the public. I apologize if some of you all were not consulted, but that has been done. I think the government has done that with CIJ as well. So we move as a team. So that has been done. And a lot of international best practices have been adopted. For example, I mean, all of us know that in the UK, for example, you do have an FOI, you also have an OSA. They coexist. So in Malaysia, we are looking at coexisting, but then there is also a question of how can OSA coexist with FOI, right? So finally, we managed to get the CGSO to amend the OSA as well. The chief, what officer is that? Azrael? Chief Security Information Officer. Yeah. So they are in charge of OSA, basically. So we even managed to get them to amend the OSA so that it's in line with the FOI, because you can't coexist if you don't amend it. So that, and we are also looking at exemptions, and then exemptions within exemptions based on harms test, public interest test, all that. So it's not just a law that you go, you request, and then you get denied. That's what everyone fears. You might just get denied. Each time you ask for a particular information, you might get denied because they claim that this is within the exemption. So if in the law itself, what we've also put in, if an agency denies you the right, they'll have to explain to you why. So that was a very big argument, a big battle we had with our CSO friends lah.
So the question is, how long is the explanation? Is it enough?
They will tell us. They will tell you, yeah. Why? Okay, for example, you have to tell us why you want your information. To be fair lah. Okay, so the government wants to know. So you tell us why you want the information, fair. And if we deny you, we have to tell you why.
But is it enough? Like they say, we have to deny you the information.
You give reason. Yes, you give reason. So that's what we have. Yes. And that was approved policy-wise. It has been approved by the government. So, I mean, when it comes to implementation, that's another issue lah.
Sorry, I forgot to put on the mic. Okay, so that kind of wraps up the first round. We want to go to the second round. I think the second round will start appropriately with CIJ and also Prof. Sabariah, if you want to chime in. It's basically a question of like, say, what kind of lessons have we learned? Andrew, I think Andrew Khoo's a question about what lessons can we draw from Penang and Selangor that we should not repeat. Yeah.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we need to have like a centralized payment system when it comes to FOI law. So it means that any kind of information that pertaining to FOI, we can just pay online. Because now, even when we pay parking, right, for our pembandaran, we just can pay online, right? So when it comes to FOI, we don't really need to pay it physically because we live in a digital world, right? And when we are having these kind of things, it will ease the burden of the people to ask for information, because these kind of hurdles that people face makes people don't want to ask for information, even though they want to ask for information, right? So the duty of the government is to ease the kind of payment system. And the second thing I think that the government needs to do is to have like enough training for the public officials when the law has been implemented, because we know that not all of the public servants are well equipped with knowledge when it comes to not just FOI but also OSA provisions, right? Because when it comes to information that people ask to them, maybe they can just say that, oh, it is under OSA, just like a blanket kind of statement, right? And they need to have like a very clear justification why they reject that kind of information. So when they have this kind of training in terms of classification, reclassification, or declassification, it will make the judgment of the officials be much more clearer and based on rationale that is that people can understand better, right? And also I think that we need to have like a proper kind of publicity when it comes to FOI, because now even we have like more than 10 years FOI law in Selangor, but people have no clue about what is FOI law, right? People mostly rely on data that is open in the system, like from DOSM. But it is just a hard and raw data that people maybe can make sense of it, right? So people still need to ask for information from the respective government agencies, right? So when we have these laws in place at federal level, people will have an avenue to ask for information. And I hope that when we have the FOI law at the federal level, every state will enact their own FOI law, which follow the standards of the national FOI law, so that information that is pertaining to state information can also be asked by the people from different states, right? Yeah, that's my take on that.
Irfan, I think you have about 1.5 minutes. I wanted to get your take on this as well. Because I think in some of my reporting on the FOIE that is in Penang and Selangor, have you seen like a change in some of the civil servants, particularly in Penang, in the sense that, at first they didn't really know what was going on, but then they've kind of caught on. And I've heard people say that sometimes you go to one department, this guy will not give you, but you go to another department, the guy will just give you a pen drive with all the information, And yeah, are there like experiences like that, where some people get it and some people don't?
Yeah, I think it's just like they just have no clue, who to ask. For example, in not all of agencies have their own information officers, right? Because that becomes a problem because they don't know who to address to. So for example, when we ask for information at Sabariah, right? So they have no person who are specifically in charge of that information. So this kind of information that is being passed from officials to officials makes our work even harder, because we don't know who to address to. But when it comes to the answer that we receive, or after 2 weeks, then we know who the person is responsible for that kind of information. So that is the kind of things that we are still struggling to.
Prof. Sabariah? Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
you got 4 minutes.
Oh.
Or a bit more if you can.
Okay, so I'll be speaking from the media point of view. So asking for information, I think one of the main concern is, of course, how probably the information will be protected under OSA, in which Dato' Punitha has rightfully explained that they are working on it already. So that is a concern actually as well. And I just wanted to share. I was just watching like a documentary by Washington Post on FOIA in America. The journalist was looking for a story and requested for documents. Yes, he got the document, but it was heavily redacted. So there is also that possibility that happens. Another, I would say, challenge is that asking the right question. Who do we ask and how do we ask? And if you ask the wrong question, then you will get the wrong answer. So that means probably hundreds and thousands of application of FOIs. So in that Washington Post documentary, so this guy actually spent like 250,000. Of course, it's by the company, but he said he asked so many questions. And after, I don't know, the millionth question probably, then only he got the answer that he wanted. So that's also something probably, aside from educating, like you said, personnel from the government, also the rakyat. How do you ask the right question? And who can you reach out to when you want to ask this sort of question, so you don't waste your time and also money? So that, I think, relates back to education as well, to know who to ask and how to ask. This is a problem actually because saying from Jomchak point of view, for instance, when we have the member of the public asking us to, can you please help fact check this? So the problem is that they could not pinpoint to us what exactly do they want us to fact check. So they will give us like a 2-hour video, honestly, 2-hour video. And the question is, can you please check if this is true? Or like sometimes we have gotten like 100-page PDF document. Can you please check if this is true? So, and we are like, okay, which part would you want us to check? Everything. Which, So that's, again, probably the interest is there, but they need to identify what they want to know, and the correct way to ask it in order for them to find the answers, like what Cik Irfan rightfully said just now as well, that they could not get some answers because certain questions were not asked the right person. And that would again incur costs and money. So this is also something that we could think about. And also, I mean, I'm really concerned with our influencers actually. If they have access to this information, and you know how they like to, go viral on certain things, and I am really scared that they would sort of misuse this access to information. How do we control that? I mean, yes, it's their right, but when they share it on their social media, it will of course be peppered with their own opinion, which might not, it might be a misinterpretation. And hence, people might be misinformed based on what they share. So that is for me a concern as well. So yes, I really support FOI. But on the other hand, I think there's also need to be some education for our rakyat as well, how to fully utilize this FOI. Yeah.
So, Dr. Punitha, a lot of stuff to cover, just from the panelists and also from the audience. But yeah, please go ahead.
I think I wouldn't say that much, but I definitely agree with both the panelists. The education is as Irfan mentioned, we have to educate the civil servants. There must be a complete shift in how they look at things, which is going to be a very big task for us. I think as I shared my experience being a civil servant, when I heard of FOI itself, I was completely no, because sometimes we have this feeling that information is ours. This belongs to the government. How can the government share? But come on lah. It's like what you mentioned. It's the public. It belongs to the people. No information belongs. We are custodians to that information. That's all. So I think they should change their mindset. That's going to be a very difficult task. So we have to train civil servants to look at it from that perspective. It's going to be a big paradigm shift. But I believe we'll be able to do it, because when you put them in that shoes, when they want to get information, then they will know how it is to get such. Sometimes being in the government doesn't mean we get information easily. If I want to get information from another agency, it's not easy. Same problem. Yes, it's not like I can just call the boss and say, please give me information. No. So FOI also helps me lah. In other words. So that is one thing that I think we must look at. The other is what Prof mentioned about the public. Very true. Sometimes when you have an FOI, the person says, okay, there's a law. Kita minta saja apa. They will have to give us what. So without knowing what information and which agency to go to. So sometimes you will go to the wrong agency. Because the public sometimes think we ask this government agency, they can give us the answer for everything under the government. For example, I'm sitting here as a civil servant, right? So you may ask me anything, you think I will have the answer for everything that happens in the government. Unfortunately, I don't. So they may have that mindset. So you go to the wrong agency, you ask the wrong question, you will never get the answer. So you will get rejection. And then the rejection will say this is not within the jurisdiction of this agency. People get pissed off because they say, how many agencies should we go to get an answer? Kan? Every agency you go, they say, ini bukan bidang kuasa kita. Ini bukan bidang kuasa kita. So it's because you don't know which agency to go to. And you don't know whether the question that you're asking may not be the right question as well. So we have to train the public as well. So I think, yeah.
So how would you propose dealing with that? Because this is something that's probably going to crop up, right? Yeah, they ask. No, I mean they have a good intention of asking for this information, but to the wrong agency, and then the request comes right and say ini bukan dalam bidang kuasa kita. How would the law deal with that? I mean, then will they get a refund, or do they get to make another request?
I think by law, you've already paid that 10 ringgit. The 10 ringgit is just a fee, isn't it? It's a one-time fee, I think. So if you go to a new agency, then probably you can already mention that you've already paid a 10 ringgit here for this particular request. We're trying to work something like, because we don't want to overburden the public. but it's still going to be very cumbersome upon them because they have to be going to so many agencies. So when you want to educate the public, that's going to be a very difficult situation. You can't expect the government to educate everybody. That's where we have to work with our CSO friends lah.
Thanks. So before you, Vinota, there's one more person. I promise. It's a gentleman dressed in green. No, he's not here. Okay, go ahead, Vino.
Hi, my name is Esminada. I work for Malaysiakini as a senior journalist. This is a question for Dr. Punitha. Actually, I have two questions. So with what you just said about agencies and we're going to multiple agencies, I think right now there are a lot of government agencies that work together. And we find that. So when I go to, like, for example, PTG, or if I go to JMG, they be working with the police, they be working with Tanah dan Galian, but there has, so yeah, so it's not for us. I mean, we do our research, not just us, but lay people as well. We, give Malaysians some credit that we do some research before we try and get information from the government. So maybe the government can actually inform when they say it's not under our jurisdiction, they can tell us where to go to so we don't keep knocking on different doors. And the other thing is, I'm just wondering if this would fall under whether it would fall under the Act, whether the Act will actually be addressing accuracy, because this is something that has been happening in other countries as well who have tested this law. And while you are able to get information, I've purchased information, I've spent my money and purchased information, and it's misleading, incorrect, sometimes, just wrong, or they don't even put it in there. Misleading is, down to just, of course, we know why. When we dig further, we know why this name was changed, why it's misleading, but is the Act going to address accuracy?
Hi, good evening. My name is Kennedy Michael. I'm from the Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance. Two questions. Can we get the draft bill? Number one. And number two, is there anything in the bill? You're smiling because we've had this experience. Those who did Urban Renewal Act, first time we actually got a draft bill. That was really good, but not for CCUS and Rupin, which is a debacle we all know about. Second one is, does the proposed FOI support open government, and will it have an impact on the MPDPA or not? And also the Whistleblower Protection Act. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Michael, you said that will it have an effect on the MPDA? Is that the personal?
Yeah, the Malaysian Personal Data Protection Act. Because, Madam, you said the government wants to know why, right? Of course, citizens would say it's none of your business. I paid for it, that's my data. It's like my sandwich. You don't ask me why I'm eating my sandwich. So to echo what this gentleman over here said, there's a rights element which removes the need for you to know why I'm asking about my data, which I paid for. Thank you.
Following up from what Andrew said earlier, that the Act actually is something worthwhile rather than just something to show the world. I'm a bit concerned listening to what's been said so far, that it might be the latter, there's something just to show to the world. I think in this regard, I think we should look at I would like some clarity is the OSA and the FOI. Which overrides what? Yeah, they're contradictory in many ways, right? So, some of us have had this kind of experience with working with the Ministry of Home Affairs, for example. They have some very vague notion about security of the world, of the country, and so on and so forth. So similarly, I think based on that kind of experience, do you see that taking place? Then another quick question is, there's always the talk that we must do this, we must do it, we must do this. Who's going to be doing it? You have an FOI, but you don't have a committee or a council or anything to enact that, to make sure that there's training, who's going to get the training, and so on and so forth, right? Not only from the public, but also the so-called civil servants. Yeah, if they keep saying beyond my jurisdiction or what's going to happen next, I think that kind of who is going to be telling them it is your jurisdiction. Yeah. So those two questions essentially my concerns.
Thanks. Let's leave it there first because we already have like really three very important questions. We'll get to the other questions in another round. So I think Dr. Punitha, you're up again.
Actually, all right. Okay, let me see whether I could go through this. Correct me if I've missed any questions. I think whether the law. I think there was a question about. I think you mentioned about the various agencies, right? I think I have personally, I have problems also with that, where sometimes information, the agencies sometimes they don't speak to each other. We face the same problem in the government itself. Okay, so I can imagine the public then. Yeah, they don't speak together. That's one. Okay, that's one problem. They don't they don't speak to each other and they don't work together. So they'll direct you to go somewhere else. They'll direct you to go somewhere else. Whereas they can actually give you all the information. So this is one example. Okay, but the example that you gave is that they work together. For example, you work PDRM, JPN, Jabatan Pendaftaran, Immigration. They work together because they're under the same ministry anyway, right? So they work together. True. But when you go to them, then they will have to direct you. So the question can be, why don't they just the single entity just give you the answer rather than directing? So those are things that we acknowledge that as a problem. And I think we have to deal with it. It's definitely, we will definitely deal with it. In terms of whether the law deals with accuracy, that is something I will have to look into it, but I don't see how we can actually embed that in the law. If someone can tell me how I can do that, I'll be happy. In terms of accuracy in the law itself. Yeah.
So there are provisions. There are provisions already in the two enactments, not entirely satisfactory, but you want to look at it. The other thing is that we were talking about, where is the information? Where does the information lie? You have two solutions here, particularly in a federal organization such as ours. Whether you have a distributed system, which is what Selangor and Penang has adopted. Each department has its own information officers, and you apply to each. And if they say, sorry, we don't have it, this deals with toilets, you need to go down the road. The answer is already in the legislation. If you don't have it, you need to show who has the information. So whether you have a single vault of all government information, or you have a process by which one department can access all information requested. The other thing is that you also can't look at the Freedom of Information Bill or Act without looking at some of the other developments. The Data Sharing Act, for instance, plays an important role in the way in which government shares information. And there is an important provision in that act which talks about sharing information of public interest. So you have a whole range of other legislation working in tandem that you need to do. As I said, I taking too much of time, I wouldn't.
Yeah. But definitely this the fact that we've already drafted our law. Our law is definitely we have taken all the other laws into consideration. The data sharing, the open government, whistleblower, of course, that's also comes under our jurisdiction, under Bayu. So definitely looked at that as well. So of course it won't go up to AGC's stage, the stage at the Attorney General's chambers, without looking at other laws. We would have definitely looked at other laws as well.
So coming back to the next question, I think when Prof. Sarung said the FOIA and OSA.
Ah.
So how does
The decision by the government is for them to coexist. Initially, it was to repeal the OSA, right? That's not happening. I have to be frank, I can't say it's happening. So it's not happening. But they would definitely have to amend the OSA accordingly. What amendments I would not be able to reveal for now, but there's going to be amendments to the OSA, so that of course they can't coexist without amending the other being amended. It doesn't jive. So, but we must understand the purpose of the OSA and the purpose of the FOI, isn't it? The OSA covers a lot on classification, declassification. You even have other areas of security, national security in it. Whereas FOI has got a lot to do with accessibility of information. So the two different things, but we don't want the OSA to be used to suppress information under the FOI. That's what everyone fear happening. So definitely this needs to be amended.
So can you also, following up on that, can you talk about like the exemption lists? Yes, everybody talks about, what is exempted and what's not exempted for FOI. So will the exemption list
Yeah.
very, very...
Very, yeah, definitely. It's a long list. I have to be frank, but fair list, I would say. Fair list, long, but it's a fair list. It's a list that you see when we brought this to cabinet. It wasn't easy because every ministry wanted to be exempted from the FOI. Right? Because you see, as I mentioned, they don't understand what is FOI. They think just like what I thought lah. FOI is you're revealing information, you're divulging information, you're sharing government secrets. Sharing government secrets, that itself is a big no-no for the government. But we are not talking about sharing government secrets. Freedom of information is not absolute, isn't it? Could it be absolute? I don't think in any country it will be absolute, right, Prof? Yeah. I mean, the public cannot say, give me everything. Right? To be fair to the government, you have to be fair to the government as well. So we have a duty to protect certain information. And that's what we're doing. But if there is, of course, the public interest, there is also the harms test. So you apply the public interest, and within the exemption, you can get exemption. If you show there is public interest overrides. If public interest overrides, why not?
Okay, so this kind of brings up to, I think, Prof. Zaron's second part, the implementers. Who's going to start implementing this? And if, like, for instance, we get rejected and we want to say that, this is exempted, who do we go to appeal?
You similar to what we have in the other states, you have FOI officers. We've also suggested that in the law. So every agency will have their FOI officer. But of course, these people need to be trained. You really have to train them to understand. Otherwise, everything will be no, cannot, tak boleh. Especially when it's going to be a lot of information. They need to understand that. So we need to train these people. So it's going to be, because otherwise, if you don't have FOI officers, how are you going to get information across the board? Isn't it? It's just huge. And then, of course, we are looking at, I think, Prof, you talked about committee, you talked about the council, right? Right, because implementing is where the devil is. So we are proposing the FOI to be under the Ombudsman Malaysia. So that's where the implementers are. And there will be an oversight body as well. There'll be an oversight body to look at appeals as well. Of course, then there'll be a question of who's going to appoint this ombudsman. That one is a question for the ombudsman topic, not FOI topic. Right?
So, things I also want to bring it back to Prof and also Irfan. This is going to start the third round. But Irfan, can you enlighten us? I mean, like some of the best practices in other worlds, right? Because Prof Dato has shared how this is going to be parked under the ombudsman. At least the appeals board is going to be parked under the ombudsman office. How does it work in the other parts of the world, particularly like Sri Lanka and Australia, where you have studied? Will these, what are some of the other alternative mechanisms that will make appeals and the oversight body more effective?
Thank you, Shaharuddin. So from what I recall, in Australia, they have ombudsman, but it have a separate body which covers for FOI, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, Doctor. And they also have like a data sharing commissioner for that too, if I'm not mistaken. And it is a different model that we adopt from Australia. So the difference is that for our own model, there'll be like a deputy ombudsman, which specifically handles requests on FOI alone. So I think that is the kind of similarity that I can see from Australia. And the other thing is that Australia have their own FOI law in their own states, because they have like a federal system like Malaysia as well, right? So from what I see that coming in recent years, we can adopt this kind of model to have our own state legislation pertaining to FOI, which follows the national standard. Because I think it's important to set a standard that the states can follow, so that the best practices can be streamlined across the board. Yep.
The other thing concerning the state laws, right? I mean, what is the incentive to give to the states for instance, Selangor and Penang are fine, right? Because we already have FOI laws, we just have to amend them. But what if like it's a state like Kelantan? Yeah, that's what she said it. I didn't know. But like, a state like Kelantan, which is different from, which is ruled by a political party that is different from the one in federal. Well, not even the Kelantan, maybe Sabah and Sarawak, right? Because they're also different political parties, would they be mandated to pass their own laws?
No, I think we are only covering the federal. So yeah, we only covered, because I think our engagement was quite clear. We had a countrywide engagement, and I think most of the states opted not to be part of the FOI. Many of the states, right? So that's why the cabinet decision is federal first. And if the states want to join us, they can join. No problem. You can have your own law later. You can have your own law, not an issue. Just like Penang and Selangor. Even the ombudsman will be a federal ombudsman. Yeah. But that is a very complex mechanism, because you do have state problems for maladministration. So that's something else.
Yeah. Also,
State up with a legislation for a long time. I think it's a furphy, as the Australians call it. You're chasing the wrong squirrel. In any case, if there is a constitutional right to information, the states cannot opt out of a system. All the states can do, if they want to make they want to look at the legislation, is to introduce the legislation in parallel. You cannot do that. Although my own view is that this concern about state and federal jurisdiction, the Article 9 descriptions of the Constitution, is actually not a real problem. It is something that some lawyers have put together to say, we can't interfere with. That is because of the jurisdictional issue. Information about the state is the state information, and therefore the federation can't do that. That is only when you're looking at the federation-state conflict. You're not looking at the federation-state conflict. You're looking at the individual's right to information, which doesn't fall within that conflict. Yeah. Quick answer to that.
Sorry. So follow-up question to that, since the state thing, right? So for instance, if like I live in a state and the state doesn't decide, like, okay, say for instance, like, in this ideal world, in August we have a federal level FOI. I live in a state that doesn't want to have an FOI, and I want information from the state because the state wants to take away my land to build something, right? And it doesn't want to give my FOI. What kind of redress can I get? Do I sue the state?
If you went now, take the position that the state doesn't want to have a legislation at all, right? Although both Penang and Selangor have shown that even with legislation, you run into difficulties. But putting that aside, if, as in the case of Haris Salleh's case, where he wanted information about the crash of an aircraft about 20 years ago, what he has to do is to go to the department and say, can I have the information? And they will say, official secrets, babale, the door out, we're not going to give you information. The difficulty then is he has got to go to court. He has got to, he writes a letter to the department concerned, can I have this information, please? It affects my life. Or he gives the reason. The reply is, or sometimes no reply, the reply is, no, we can't give you the information. That reply then is open to judicial review. Now, and it can be very oppressive. I work with an Aboriginal community. For 60 years, their land has not been gazetted. Why? Because the information lay on the desk of this particular person. So anyone who goes to seek information about putting up a hydroelectric power station along one of the rivers doesn't have access to information because the information has been put into a drawer. And so the question here really is that the Freedom of Information Act serves even those who are not looking for that information. Their information forms part of the decision-making processes. So, if I have a special interest, that interest, as in the case of the Aboriginals, that interest must be recorded somewhere so that decisions are made based on that. That part of it is not there. The other two real omissions in the legislation or the discussions that I've heard so far is, one, there isn't a specific provision on the right of the media to obtain information. And, I think the one or two countries, one of them being Jamaica, has a provision that actually recognizes the special position of the press in actually obtaining information. That is one. The other one, as was already pointed out, the Official Secrets Act, but there's another legislation, which is the Whistleblowers Act. Now, remember, a whistleblower is someone who's blown the information. He did not wait for anyone to ask for the information. He has given that information. I don't know whether it's going to be brought within the Freedom of Information legislation, but that's something that you need to look at as well. Yeah.
Sorry, would you like to reply to at least the concern about the whistleblowers, the conflict between the Whistleblowers Act and put then the FOIA?
Yeah, definitely, because the WBA, the law that we have right now is the Whistleblowers Protection Law. Yeah, and we're amending it accordingly as well. We've amended it recently. I think last year we amended the Whistleblower Protection Act. We are going to amend it again because whistleblower will also come under the jurisdiction of the Ombudsman. So it's going to be a very big setup, because right now for whistleblower, the problem we have is that you don't have a central agency. So when you want to whistleblow, right, according to the law, you can go to any enforcement agencies. But the problem with enforcement agencies are they're not trained, right? And most of the cases we receive are on corruption, SPRM. So SPRM, they'll go to SPRM. But they can actually go to any enforcement agencies, even at the state level. So whistleblower protection law in Malaysia actually covers even the public sector. Even a public company, it's an agency. If you want to whistleblow about a HR, to your HR about something that's happening in your organization, you can do that. It's covered by the law. But people don't know about it. So that's why it is definitely an underutilized law. So with the Ombudsman, we are hoping to bring this forward. We are hoping to look at how we can differentiate between internal mechanism. If you are talking about a private organization, whistleblower in a private organization, how would it work? Whistleblower in a public setting, how does it work? But it cannot be the same. It's going to be very difficult. So if you want to whistleblow on something that happens in an organization, a private entity, how do you do it? Do you come to the government? Doesn't make sense. So you need to have some form of internal reporting, internal mechanism that is acknowledged by the law itself. So those are things that we are looking at.
So, sorry, our organizers have said we have about 10 minutes left. I would like to get to some questions at the back before we leave. Oh, sorry. Okay. these two, the gentleman with the glasses, I owe him a question, and after that, no, the other one, yeah.
Hi, I'm Lalit. I'm from SAM, Sabariah, Malaysia. So I have a question related to an earlier question that was asked between the overlap between OSA and also the upcoming FOI actually. So so how does this law plan to deal with the fact that I understand that it's going to be exemptions, and the law is going to try to get the information to the people, but how does the law envision? Is there a mechanism in place, a safeguard in place that actually prevents when we apply for information, from the information to be from being rejected carte blanche, because this concerns national security? So how does that work? Could you explain that a bit more in detail? And number two is that okay, how does the upcoming law also plans to deal with the conflict between private and public law, in a sense that okay, say that we ask about an information, say as government information, so that's fine, that's a public right to know, but there are also reports and things that corporations would have to submit to the government agencies and stuff. So what safeguard is there in the law that prevents the government authorities, the agency that's going to be answering you, from saying that, oh, this is actually the intellectual property of the company, so we can't give it to you? So there is a conflict there, right? So how is there any safeguard there to deal with that kind of situation?
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Pauline. I'm a member of a NGO, Jaringan Rawang Tolak Incinerator. This is a residents coalition, a loose coalition that we object the building of the proposed incinerator in Batu Arang. So I just like to share my experience dealing with the Selangor state government when we try to obtain information on how the land rezoning for this project approved, despite like thousands of protest forms being sent to them. So I went there with a couple of friends, two friends. So we waited like more than 1 hour just for them to tell us that who should responsible, how to deal with us, mana level what, members who, nobody knows. So eventually, after like 1.5 hours, finally they say officer coming down. So she was also not very sure that, how to go about the process, how to obtain which department should go to, not able to tell us anything. But at least come up with a form like, yeah, you want to obtain this information, just get it from, you just fill up this form and then pay 10 ringgit, okay, for each information, each documents that we requested. Okay, after that, after we fill up the forms, and then come to payment. Oh, how macam mana pay So eventually they figured out we go to the Majelis Perbandaran MPS counters to pay. So finally it's done. Then we waited for another few months for them to finally come back to us to say that, we cannot give you the information. So, sorry? Yeah, he just said that not finalized things, But I don't know, because from what I traced, actually I'm a former journalist, so I traced all the information on the media that we got. We just try to figure out that whether the land rezoning was approved even before the hearing was done. Yeah, we tried to figure that out, but even that, we just couldn't get anything. So when I saw this forum, right, so I'm kind of very curious, how meaningful it could be if like FOI is there, but it's not helping anything. You cannot obtain any information, and no one will be held responsible, Like now, as ordinary people, that after this is rejected, how can I go about it? I appeal, and to whom, and how much cost and time that I got to spend. So I just thought, is there any possibility that this federal level FOI that Perhaps it's too ideal, but I just want to put this forward that be more progressive, providing like important information of public interest, like major project like this, about environment, about people's health, you just put it out there, for those who are really interested, they're really concerned about the issue to just get it. And you do not have to ask and go through all this bureaucracy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. I won't, because we only have about 5 minutes left. I want to give, let's say, the panelists the chance to respond to some very important points.
Thank you. I think if I could just go into very quickly on the mechanism. One thing I can add is I think in the law itself, we are putting a clause on proactive disclosure. So, meaning that agencies will have to disclose. You don't have to wait for people to ask you. If certain information is very important, so it becomes a proactive disclosure. You just put it out. That's I think that's what you mentioned. But the question is then we have to identify what kind of information falls under the ambit of proactive disclosure. So that's another difficult part, but that's in the law actually. Secondly, when you said the mechanism, I think you spoke about the mechanism. I think with the ombudsman, because that was the issue that we had. When you have the FOI legislation, then who is going to implement it was the same question Prof mentioned also earlier, right? Who's going to be the implementers? That's where we said, okay, then the government had this policy that you cannot set up new organizations, new bodies. So we have to also follow that policy. So because of that, we have a single entity called Ombudsman, which is, it's not approved by, the bill has not been tabled yet, but of course the policy has been approved by cabinet, and that's why I'm open about it. So you will have, if there is a rejection, right, you can always appeal. You can always appeal. Before you're appealing, you can go for review. There will be a review process. So it's not like complete rejection and that's it. There is a review process. You can also go through some form of mediation. I remember when we had a meeting, when we met the FOI commissioner in Bern, Switzerland. They have a very, very good mediation mechanism for FOI. So that kind of solves a lot of problems, at least in their country lah. So that we thought of looking at that as well, and then only you can go to the appeals. The appeals, there'll be a tribunal under the ombudsman itself, an independent tribunal that listens to your appeal. So there is a process, there is a mechanism, there is a process, and under the ombudsman, you will already have a wing that looks at FOI. So that's what we have planned. So you'll have a wing for FOI, you'll have a wing for WBA, a whistleblower protection. So that's the process that we are looking at. Okay.
Sorry, there was another question concerning, like, say, what if it can the request concerns information kept by private or corporate.
PDPA applies, right? PDPA applies.
No. It's the question is like it's
information that is sent to the government.
Yeah. So if the information requested by the government also is really TIAs, EIAs, and SIAs that
as long as it's in
could be owned by the corporations.
Applied by the corporations.
Could be owned by the corporations.
Owned by the corporations.
So I'm raising this because in our experience, what has happened is that sometimes you will write in and ask to say DOE to ask for EIAs and stuff like that. So the response that we will sometimes get is that no, you should ask that directly to the project proponent because it's their copyright. So I'm thinking like how does this law is going to address that, things like that.
I think Azril, correct me if I'm wrong. If it is in the domain of the government, that means it's already submitted to the government and it's the domain of the government, then I think there is no issue. If it is not within the exemption, it can be divulged, not an issue. if it's within the domain of the government, that means you already submitted it to us. If it is
I'd like to give like some of the panelists last remarks, starting with Prof. Sabariah and then Irfan. Yeah.
Okay, so I look forward to the FOI because I believe it will help empower the media and so that they can play their role effectively as a fourth estate. And they can be the voice of rakyat because as somebody said just now, that sometimes they don't know that this information could benefit them. So this is where the media can play a role. And I hope, this is something positive that I look forward to. Yeah.
So Irfan, I think one question that we want to ask is basically how can we as a society ensure that the government passes a strong FI? I mean, speaking from the civil society perspective, right? There must be a call to action. Like if we really want, I mean, I'm glad that Dr. Punitha came to see us and she's assured us that this is going to be as effective as possible. But, at the end of the day, there are other decision makers besides her, that will determine how the FOIA will look like, right? So how do we make sure that we, that we get the FOIA that we want, right?
Yeah, I think as a CSO, we need to keep on making voices, raise our issues consistently so that the government will know that it is a very pressing issue that the government needs to tackle on. Because if we don't become persistent in whatever that we want to get, then the government will forget about it, right? And we also need to make sure that the independence of the committee will be kept in place so that there is no political game in there. So when it comes to information, we need to make sure that the government is being very fair for the people, regardless of their status and also their political parties and whatnot. And as a public at large, we also need to exercise our rights with or without FOI law in place. Because if we know how to ask for information, then in one way we can show the government that we as a people have the power to ask for information. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you, everyone. That's all the time that we have right now. Please give a round of applause to our panelists. The building closes at about 10:30, so I know we couldn't get to all the questions. So feel free to approach any of our panelists after this. Thank you once again. I'm Shaharuddin from Malaysiakini. Please continue to support our website, and stay tuned for other further programs. And I would like to thank once again Dr. Punitha for being here, Professor Sabariah, and also Irfan Shaharuddin. I hope that the dialogue and the discussion that we have here can go towards making a truly strong and effective FOI that we think that Malaysia deserves. Thank you.